Happy holidays from the BWI Daily Edition. Merry Christmas. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr, talking about a bunch of interesting things today, as we always do on the BWI Daily Edition. Nate Bauer here to share some of those thoughts, because a lot of this coming from when he asked James Franklin on Friday about an interesting topic, and then what to expect, what to look for in the bowl game. That's what we're going to talk about today on the Daily Edition. So, Nate, happy holidays. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm cold. My house is cold. I need to turn the heat up. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Some technical difficulties today make me want to throw stuff, and I have a free USB camera sitting on top of my very expensive camera I bought for the show. So, you know how it is. You just got to roll with it. But
I know how it is. I'm familiar.
So that's why if the show looks a little bit different today. But what's most important is that we're bringing you the information you want to know about Penn State football. And Nate, you asked a really interesting question of James Franklin on Friday, which is now an article at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Sign up for just $1 holiday season. It's the season of giving. We are in the week of Christmas, so Christmas presents, stocking stuffers, $1. $1.
Buy it.
Yeah.
For $1. It's
Yeah.
fine.
I for the price of the stupid camera I'm using, and I'm not going to let it go because I'm really annoyed by it, I could have fine. Like 20 subscriptions because it's a $20 camera.
And hand them out to all of your friends. That's all that we're asking. No
yes.
big deal.
So what did you ask James Franklin?
Yeah, no, so and trust me, I mean, it was really only because it was the first time that we had an opportunity to talk to him really since the last game of the season for Penn State at Michigan State. There was an article, and we've talked about it here. There was an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer where they talked to Villanova's linebacker, Forrest Rhyne. And, it was kind of this wide-ranging story, and kind of 2/3 of the way through the story was this little segment about how much preparation he does for games. And I'm already boring myself with this story, but he was saying that he had never had a game like Penn State where they hit on 100% of tells. Basically, yeah. They had one specific thing that they were looking for as a defense that would allow them to know whether the play was going to be a run or a pass. And he was, the quote is something to the effect of, sometimes it's 20%, sometimes it's 50%, occasionally it's high at 70%. This was crazy. It was 100%. And so I asked Franklin, it was just like, hey, did you see this in this specific game? And was that something that turned out to be a theme through the course of the season? There's always stuff, right? Yeah. There's like, you cannot hide or disguise everything that you're doing all of the time. But the way that it read in the story and the way that Forrest made it sound was that this was atypical. This was more than he had seen previously.
Yeah.
And so Franklin's response was effectively no, right? Like, no, there weren't tells through the course of the season. There were in that game. They had a dialogue with Villanova's coaching staff. That's one of the benefits of a game like that, where you have a familiarity with the staff, is you can trade notes after the game, right? Yep. You've already played each other. At that point, you're not
trying to play for the same championship either. Like, I think that's important too, is there's 100%. You can be a little more open with those players.
Exactly. And specifically the coaching staff. So
yeah.
Franklin acknowledged that this existed in that Villanova game, that Villanova's coaching staff had, brought their attention to it, and that it had been rectified. But the breadth of the answer was effectively, hey, this happens all the time. This is something that is common in the game of football. You will always have things about your technique based on run or pass that give it away more or less, right?
Yeah. Well, this is a classic thing in football. I remember the first time I heard about it is like you look at the knuckles of the guy in front of you. And if his knuckles are white here, it means his weight is forward and it's a run play. And if it's not, it means it's a pass play because his center of gravity is backwards. I learned that in high school, and that's like an easy tell. So this is the advanced version of that.
It always brings stuff to light for me in the sense of I have no idea. You know what I mean? I played high school football for 2 seasons and got my butt kicked during that time. So the intricacies of what happens at this level, to me, it was more of an educational, thing to ask, right? Like, how often does this happen? Is this something that can actually have an impact on performance? Because as we know, Penn State's running game it struggled all season. There were right, but that game in particular stood out because they had so much other success offensively. They had 400 plus yards of offense in that game. They were able to move the ball up and down the field, but they only had 80 yards or something in that ballpark rushing on 30, 40 carries.
It also goes to show you that, like, unless you're so physically superior to another player, if the playing field isn't even and the other team knows what you're about to do, anyone can shut you down. And that was a good Villanova front, but you're right. That was an exceptional performance by those players.
Yeah, and I went back to look just to see because I knew going into that game that Villanova had success with that defensive front, but they finished top 15 in FCS for rushing defense this season. It wasn't an anomaly that Villanova had a tough front. It was just an anomaly in the sense that Penn State otherwise had done pretty much what it wanted to do offensively in that game, but it couldn't effectively run the ball. And if you're looking at the broader picture, you can probably point to that and say, okay, well, this was an element in that game. This was one of the contributing factors that prevented Penn State from having the success it wanted to have rushing the ball.
So then my kind of thought then goes to, well, it's not like this tell just showed up one week. So is that, I think the first 4 games you can kind of put that light on this particular topic in this conversation, going back to Wisconsin, where Wisconsin was hyper aggressive and was able to absolutely shut down Penn State's running game, especially in the first half. Is that to me, the question is that fair? Because to your point, no for the full season, but the first 4 games seem like they're fair game to me until you get this information from an opposing coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, I have not had the time to go back and look for it. I think you have maybe strongly hinted that you saw something that seemed amiss in that Villanova game. I don't know if you want to share it here in this forum or not, but
well, I found I had 99% sure I know what it is going back and watching the film. I have not been able to, just because of all the things going on, go back and look at the first 4 games necessarily. But if your offensive lineman has a different stance for a run play and a pass play, and it's noticeable, there it is. That's the answer. Like, if your foot is a full foot length, not like a measurable foot, but like if your foot is 1 foot's length forward or back and your hips are completely different, that's an obvious tell for the defense. And that affects every lineman. And now I kind of have to reevaluate in my mind how some players played in certain schemes, because if you know exactly what's coming on a zone play, there's all kinds of room to knife in the backfield, especially for guys on the other side, on the back side of run formations. So,
yeah, and you're not defending half of the game.
Yeah,
right. Like, I mean, if Mike Yursich talked about on Friday as an offensive coordinator that you're constantly trying to break tendencies, that this is what you do in this situation, and you're trying not to fall into an obvious pattern of, okay, first down, run, second down, right, whatever it is.
Right. There was a lot of first down runs, though, if he was trying not to do that.
Well, So, but if that's the case, right? Third and short, third and a yard, short yardage, everybody knows that you're going to run, right?
Yeah.
As it is. But if it's second and 6,
Yep.
and you're entirely predictable, right? Like,
yep. Well, that's where it is.
Because you're not predicting anymore. You're looking at something that's telling you, oh, this is what the play is.
Yep.
This is what it's going to be.
Everyone knows in 3rd and 9 what you're going to do for the most part. Everyone knows in 3rd and 15 or any of those. I would say even in 2nd and 15, like if you have a false start or something like that, there's a good chance you're going to throw the football. But you're right. Those plays in between, especially on 2nd down and the efficiency downs, that's where you have to be unpredictable. And if you want to know, by the way, if you want to know who it was, this is another great reason, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Go into the Lions Den. If you are a premium member, you've signed up for On 3, and you can go see on Nate's article, I gave you the answer of who it was and how it affected the game. So definitely go check it out. That does change how you attack players. Now, in that particular game, to your point, Penn State was bigger, faster, and stronger, so when they threw the ball, they could do whatever they want. But in the run game, that's where you can equalize things. So is that something? Is this a referendum on the coaching staff that they didn't notice that going into the 4th game of the season?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I think that that the answer is probably somewhere in between this great damning indictment of, oh my gosh, how do you not know? How is this possible to have something like this go through, when the reality is that's what they're living in the football building to do every week, right? Like, I mean, is that not what film study is? Right? Like, I mean, if you're watching endless loops of your opponent trying to figure out the smallest detail. I mean, people talk about that with receivers all the time, right? Yep. Receivers and defensive backs is just what are the things that they do that distinguish the type of route that it's going to be, right? Like, and so as the player themselves, you're trying to reduce that as much as you possibly can. That's what every rep is about. And that's why they talk about every rep being important in practice. That's what Jahan Dotson is obsessive about. Like, the guys who get into that so deeply that they can represent the same thing every time that they line up. However, for the guys who can't, for the guys who are not paying attention to those details and are representing something that they might not want to represent, you can figure it out. Right? Yeah. Like, you can figure it out. And so, I mean, I do think that it's an interesting part of the game is if you can figure out what the other guy's doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it before the snap, you give yourself a pretty big advantage in terms of being able to defend that play.
And that it's also on the player. And this is always the conversation of, is it on the coach or is it on the player? And it's always either or. If you're a player, you mentioned Jahan Dotson, if you're a player that's serious about your craft and you want to be excellent, you want to be great, you're watching that. You're going and you're looking for those things. If you're not, it's a blind spot. Another interesting thing that I think is playing into this is that I mentioned the Wisconsin game to start the season. You're not starting with Villanova like you normally would. So starting with a Big Ten opponent, you don't have time to debrief in the preseason like you would, so that information might only get to you in week 4. Apparently, Ball State didn't have the same information, or if they did, they declined to share it with the Nittany Lions after the game, because that would be the only other time where you're facing an opponent of the typical variety in the preseason, in order to get that information and get those kinks worked out. And that's another point of James Franklin's of starting the way you did is insane to try and have success long term. So it's just another interesting wrinkle in all of that stuff. But I kind of look at it as the coaching staff should probably know. Yes, you should probably be looking at that. But if the player has the pride about them of those things, it wouldn't show up that drastically.
Right. Right. No, yeah. I mean, it's certainly something that you have to wonder whether or not a player thinks that it doesn't matter because their own performance individually can overcome that.
Right.
Versus, you know what I mean? Because you're only thinking about it in the context of what the impact is on you,
Right.
without being able to realize what the impact might be on the rest of the team.
Yeah.
In a circumstance like that.
Yeah, your running backs, the other linemen who have to block, and if the whole defense knows what it is, you're right. It's not just you; it's everyone around you, and maybe that's a good lesson on empathy for our. Speaking of the holidays, it's a good lesson on empathy right there.
Love empathy.
So, looking ahead to the bowl game, interesting things that you noticed at practice of where people were lining up and how absences were affecting the first week of practice or the first day of practice for the bowl game. I want to look at players that we're interested in seeing during the 2022 Outback Bowl. So I have a list of players. Do you want to get a list of players? Do you have a list of players ready, or do you want me to lead and we talk about them individually as we go?
You know what? We can volley a little bit because I have some that I'm certainly interested in. I don't have a written down list, but I've been winging it on tests for my whole life, so we can do it live, man. I got no problem with that.
Perfect. So the first guy I want to bring up, and I think this is the most interesting name that you got for us during the practice on Friday, and for whatever the information is worth, as far as if that is the case for the whole practice or what we saw, Ola Fashanu was taking snaps at left tackle according to your reporting, and I find that very interesting. I find this fascinating for a number of reasons. The first is that we have not seen him at any point this year, and yet he is the number one player along the offensive line that Rasheed Walker, Caden Wallace, and James Franklin have talked about consistently all season long as being an impressive football player. So first off, what were your observations of practice, and are you as intrigued by this as I am?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, they've been practicing through December, and this was the one that they specified as being the first that would really revolve around Arkansas. And so you have to think that maybe some of the trial and error things that they might be willing to do the first 2 weeks of December had started to transition into more of this is the actual game. This is what the approach will be for the game. But no, in addition to him, you saw Eric Wilson at left guard, which is pretty standard at this point, obviously. But Juice Scruggs was the center, Mike Miranda at right guard, and then Caden Wallace at right tackle. So clearly they went into this month, anticipating maybe that Rasheed Walker would not be available for this game for
whatever reason. He was not available for the final two for whatever reason, so makes sense.
Correct. And so there's that. And then also, I think as the season had gone along, Mike Miranda's efficacy there at center had started to wane a little bit. And so they started to play around with Scruggs there at center. And so long story short, you're probably going to look at a new look, a different look offensive line for a variety of reasons and in a variety of spots, including that left tackle spot.
So the left tackle spot with Fashanu going into the Michigan State game, where you might have expected to see him, but we didn't see him during practice, I don't think. He must have been one of the players that was dealing with the virus, because you hear about him all season long, and then all we saw was Landon Tengwall for the last 2 weeks. Right. And yet James Franklin and several other people have talked about Landon Tengwall in every other sense except for at that left tackle position. Franklin keeps bringing up the idea of Landon Tengwall being able to play anywhere along the line. So that's why I'm so interested in Olu Fashanu. Is it Fashanu or Fashanu? I've heard it both ways.
I think it's Fashanu.
Okay.
I think it's Fashanu. But
I'm so interested to see, because this can fix a lot of the problems that Penn State has if they've got a guy on their roster that is an underrated player or a guy that's kind of a dark horse that's going to be developmental. This is what Caden Wallace had to say about him on Friday when I asked.
He's just really athletic, and he can pick certain techniques he wants to work on for a day at practice, and he can get some pretty good reps and some pretty good learning reps. And he does it every day and it stacks up. So he's starting to develop.
Do you think Penn State has their next left tackle? It seems to be that's the indication that it's not going to be Landon Tengwall, who we've seen, but really Olufashanu is the guy that is poised to take over for Rasheed Walker.
I think that there is a lot of time between now and
hot takes
September.
Hot takes, Nate.
I know you want I honestly I don't know what they're going to do in the transfer portal. I don't know what is going to exist in the transfer portal. Certainly there have been enough things. I mean, these aren't even undertones. These are things spoken about Tengwall and about Fashanu as guys who appear to be, with Bryce Effner, the three most poised to contribute, right? I mean, we didn't really see anybody else this year. So, are they ready right now? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that their lack of playing time until the end of the season was accidental. Right. I mean, I think that they thought that very clearly there was a separation between that top line unit and the players that were behind them.
Also, however, you're not going to bench Rasheed Walker, who is your most veteran player, and that's the position I'm focusing on specifically.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, but look, like even right here, I'm looking at PFF's breakdown of Penn State's tackles. It's really pretty simple. It's Wallace, Effner, and Walker. Like those are the three guys that played until Walker, obviously fell off there at the end of the year. And then you see 2 games for Tengwall and 3 games for Fashanu. So, is there a possibility there? Whether or not they're trying him there or think that is what his long-term projection is, I'm not really sure right now. But certainly that's connecting the dots, right? This is what the future may look like for Penn State there.
And to me, because coming up later this week, professional tease here. Although when you pointed out, it's no longer professional. Coming up later this week, I'm taking a deep dive into the offensive line and the offensive line recruiting and how that particular position has been just kind of a total miss for Penn State football when it comes to recruiting offensive tackles. So if they found one finally, because there has been no heir apparent in recruiting or in any sort of overt way to Rasheed Walker. If this is our first indication of who that is, I think that opens up a lot of things that Penn State football fans should be encouraged by if the offensive personnel is right. Because the way James Franklin has talked about Landon Tengwall, who is the other guy I'm interested in seeing, is where they play him when they have the option of where they want to play him. Here's a nice photo of him here. What is his best position? Where is he actually going to play? Where do they want to play him? And if it's not in an emergency situation at left tackle, where I think he's a better player either on the right side or in the interior, then you've got 2 new players to put on the offensive line, which is what they needed all season long. These guys weren't ready yet. So that should indicate what you think the future might be and how you might get these talented players in the best position for them, as we've talked about previously. So that's what I want to see. I want to see them with their best lineup, what they want to do with the future, not what they have to do to get through a game where everyone has the flu or a giant snowstorm. So that's why I'm looking at those guys. Who do you have on your list?
But that's to that point. The Outback Bowl isn't going to be that choice, right? Like the Outback Bowl isn't picking out, hey, this is what we think the best lineup is. This is, hey, Rasheed Walker is not going to play because he's going to the NFL.
Right. But
Right? Like,
I'm saying life after Rasheed Walker. Like they are now forced into, if Rasheed Walker is opting out, and I'm kind of getting that feeling myself, but everything TBD. If that is the case, then they will have the most time to prepare. They will have the most time to adjust and adapt to what they want everything to look like, versus we have to get through a game without Rasheed. Now we have Rasheed is not going to be a part of this plan going into it. So what's our best opportunity? What's our best idea? And that's what I'm excited to see, is because it is kind of a reset.
Yeah, no, it is very much. Somebody asked the question on Friday whether or not this is the end of this season or the beginning of next, and it's both. That was James Franklin's answer, and I think certainly that's how you can start to look at this moving forward. Can I? Is it my turn?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So Malik Mega is for me the guy on offense who I think becomes intriguing. He obviously missed the first half of the season due to injury, and really sort of had this budding role afterwards. Right. Really, since from the Illinois game forward, he started to become more and more of a piece of the puzzle. And then obviously that picture that you're showing there is from Rutgers, where he had a 63 yard touchdown, where kind of, not exactly the most thrilling play in terms of, making a contested catch.
Brilliant execution in some way, defeating a good scheme instead of, it's there.
Being 20 yards behind the safety. Yeah. So, no, but look, like if, again, we're making some assumptions here based on the fact that, these guys haven't released statements yet, and we're not reporting anything to the contrary. But I think there's a fairly safe assumption that Jahan Dotson probably won't play in this game. And if he doesn't play, or even if it's limited, right? Either way, you're going to see some opportunities start to open up, for Penn State's receivers. And I think that certainly Penn State would want that anyway. You're moving into this next chapter of what your receivers room looks like. And that's a unit that, for one reason or another, just it has done a good job through different coaches, through James Franklin's tenure really at Penn State. They just seem to have a next guy who is ready to contribute, who's ready to step up. And so, obviously Parker Washington is that guy for next season, but that doesn't change the fact that a guy like Malik Mega, who all of the conversation has been really positive, just his demeanor, his personality, the way that he conducts himself, on top of the physical attributes that he brings to the game. Yeah. It kind of creates this enticing, explosive, guy that they're optimistic about. So can he make an impact in a game where Sean Clifford is healthy and can deliver the football? Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
And that's not to set it up this way, but that's why I think the offensive line is really important, to make sure that does happen, where you can evaluate these other guys and you can get a better idea of who else you have, because you need to have that other guy. James Franklin mentioned of the positions they'd like to target in the portal, receiver was one, and that's something I've brought up a couple times of, yes, they have talent. Yes, Keandre Lambert-Smith shows flashes of being very talented, and Malik Mega has shown you that he can catch the football, and I've been encouraged what I've seen in practice of him, but you need more. And this is a great opportunity to feel good about next season, feeling like you do have a solid 2, so then you're going into the portal hoping to find a complementary receiver. You're not trying to find the guy that is the Robin to Batman. Now you need Alfred. You're not looking for Robin. You're down the list. Maybe you're on I don't know DC that well, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The cop, Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Gordon. That's who I was trying to think of.
I'm not a fan of that stuff either.
So, are there any other receivers that you think we could see? Do you think we see anything from Liam Clifford or from Harrison Wallace in this situation?
Yeah, potentially Jaden Dotton is a guy who I'm still interested to see. There was a little bit of buzz about him in the preseason. So obviously he kind of went through some injuries, some bumps and bruises, that kind of stuff that inhibited his contributions this season. But he's a guy who saw at least once on Friday a pass directed toward. So who knows? Maybe that's something that opens up a little bit moving forward as well.
The next guy I want to bring up is a guy that you brought up again in your reporting on Friday is Kobe King was taking some snaps at linebacker alongside the starting unit. And this is something that I wasn't sure if he would get there this year, but he was clearly closing the gap on Tyler Elsdon as far as that other box linebacker that can make a difference this year. And I think for Penn State fans, that's encouraging that he has been in that position. Tell us about what you saw from Kobe King and kind of what you're expecting about that particular situation from what you saw.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I had a ton of time to watch him, just that he was manning the mic and, had a little bit of an opportunity there with what we expect to be. I don't think he's announced it either, but it doesn't appear as though Ellis Brooks will be available for this game. And look, like, Ellis Brooks is not a superstar name by any means, but of the guys that were there and are on the field, he's one of them. Right? Like, I mean, that's I'm not diminishing his impact at all. He was a very, very you could count on him in every game this season. And so if Penn State has to look elsewhere to fill that position, and we all know really how that position is viewed in Penn State's defense as kind of being this critical keystone piece. Yeah, I think that the fact that Penn State might turn to Kobe King in this instance maybe bodes well, right? In terms of what his progression and his development has been.
Yeah. The other thing that we saw in the season in emergency situations when in the Michigan or the Rutgers game was that Jonathan Sutherland was really the backup to Curtis Jacobs at the Sam position. That's going to beat Arkansas is not Rutgers. That's not going to work very well. In my opinion, that's not going to be a situation that works very well. But that is something that they're going to be facing as far as who they might turn to at that Sam linebacker position. One thing about these players going to the NFL that I just want to say my piece right here, is that it doesn't matter if you think that Brandon Smith needs to come back and get better. Sure, I think you can make a case for that. I've made a case a couple of times that he needs to improve his box coverage or his box run defending ability. But if he's gotten the word from NFL scouts that he's a day 2 pick, he can do that and make several $1 million at the same time and do it professionally. He's going to be a guy that people are pouring time and energy into. So you can do that at college or you can do that at the NFL. And for Ellis Brooks, he's kind of, to me, he's in the same mold as, I always go back to Kevin Givens as a guy that everyone thought should stay. But if you're physically topped out and you feel like you've technically topped out of, I'm a good football player. And Ellis Brooks is a good football player. Of the guys that are in that gray area of stay or go, to me, he was the one that had the most complete game. He had nothing that he really needed to show on film. So there you go. And now Penn State has to fill both of those positions. And Kobe King is the guy, and that's why I want to see what he can do.
Yeah, I just, to your point, there are limited miles on these legs and these bodies that these guys have. It is so infrequent anymore for players to have double-digit year careers in the NFL. I mean, it's hard enough to distinguish yourself in that forum, right? When you're against arguably some of the world's best athletes. Yeah. But the earnings clock is just so short. It just really is so very, very short for these guys that if the opportunity is there and you don't feel like you can elevate yourself into a number in terms of a contract that is, just demonstrably different, go for it.
Yeah.
Right. Like start that earnings clock, start it, get into it and get going, because you don't really know. And you're working for that second contract anyway. So,
right. And if you go in a little bit early, that second contract comes around sooner. So
yep.
if you can get it, and that's the thing. That's when I first started thinking about that, was with Saquon Barkley and the running back situation with these 5th-year deals and franchise tags. And I mean, you can be almost 30 by the time you get to your second contract if you're unlucky and you have to stay too long in college. So if you're a high-level player and he is an elite athlete, he was good this year. For whatever Penn State fans feel about him, he was good this year. His coverage was good. He improved in the run game. He did enough to go to the NFL. That's his plan. So, good luck to him. And I think that he got a bad rap for some for 2020 that spilled over more than it should have into 2021 with some of the issues up front. Speaking of up front, who are you looking at that defensive end position? Because this one feels wide open.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. Smith Vilbert,
yeah.
Right? I mean,
it's a place to start. It's one of the names we've heard and one of the players we've seen.
Yeah, it's just Zariah Fisher. And obviously they're guys who are doing different things. Jesse Luketa, Nick Tarburton, obviously, but it's just assuming, again, Arnold Ebiketie probably not available for this game. That's a hole. That's a massive hole to fill. I mean, his impact this season was undeniable. So yeah, Penn State is gonna have to figure some things out there from probably a guy or two who has not been a frequent contributor this season. Look, like I think that part of the conversation and what I might be dancing around a little bit here is these are significant players who Penn State is projecting to probably be without in this bowl game.
Yeah.
And so whether they're ready or not, there is no transfer portal ahead of this game.
That's a great way to put that. Yeah, there's nobody else coming in. It's who you've got.
You gotta shoot what you got. So
yeah,
we'll see. We will get a much better idea, certainly, than even the blue-white game, right? Like,
yeah,
there are these moments during the season where you start to get an idea of how guys are coming along, how they're developing, how they're progressing. And one of the things that has become clear to me through the years of doing this is that development doesn't happen during the season at nearly the rate that it does from January to August, right? From January to September. And so, like, these guys, a lot of these guys who are scout team players, whether or not they're in that too deep or not, scout team players, their role on the team is to present the look of the opponent.
Yeah.
That is their primary responsibility. And so John Scott's not worried about the technique of the third string, fourth string defensive end.
Yeah.
Right. Like
if he can get it on its own, if he can absorb that on his own, then great. But really, if you're focusing on developing the guys that need to play, and Penn State, it's not like they had one edge rusher that you could count on that had professional moves. Everyone else needed work, including one of your best players, Jesse Luketa, which is why I'm curious to everything you set up perfectly, because a guy that we keep hearing about, and another guy Caden Wallace talked about as far as who's flashed in the development period so far, is Devon Townley. I really like his film from high school. I like his physical abilities. I like his twitch and his size. And he's gotten bigger, like noticeably bigger in person since the beginning of the season. So I don't know if we'll see him in this game, but he's a name that has come to surface, like you've mentioned, some of the other guys that have been mentioned as far as players that have taken a step during the season in the context you just put there. So that's always the important thing. So I guess it is open, but Zariah Fisher, are Smith Vilbert, like, I've seen enough from these guys on the field, on film, that I don't know that I'm going to see anything different from them in the bowl game other than they'll get more reps.
But more reps are good.
Yeah.
More reps helps you, and it gets you some game experience that you otherwise might not have. So, that's what they got to do. It's what the situation is. So, now I one more that I'd like to add is at safety. Just given what, again, we are making an assumption that Jaquan Brisker probably won't be available for this game for Penn State. So what does that look like, right? I mean, is John Sutherland, is he fulfilling linebacker responsibilities, or is he the second guy with Tig Brown back there? Or, for instance, Keaton Ellis, right? Does he become a possibility? He's a guy that we saw out there on Friday in practice in some of those defensive rotations. So, look, Jalen Reed, you've got different players back there who don't necessarily, and this was something that I often get wrong, but it's become more and more clear to me that they want these guys to be able to handle the field and the boundary at safety, right? Like they don't, because I think you even asked Terry Smith, right, in terms of on signing day about some of the responsibilities that they peg these guys in, and I think you can maybe fill in here for me, but I think his answer was something to the effect of, no, we want him to be able to play both. We want him to be able to.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of talent acquisition, that's the goal. When you're talking about, I think what he was saying was ideally, and that's right. Kind of me reading between the lines, because what he said was, no, we train them to do both. We want them to be able to do both. And then he mentioned in a bowl game against a team like Arkansas that runs up tempo, you can't get set. Sometimes you have to just go left, right, and you have to get the call in. You have to play both. So ideally, you want to have guys that do both things. And Jaquan Brisker is the ultimate example of that. But when I talked to Jair Brown, he was saying that one of the areas he got better at this year and that Brisker helped him with was his run fits and playing better in the box. That means next year, if he steps into that Jaquan Brisker role, because they do differentiate, whether they want them to be both or not, and they have to have skills that do everything at safety, you will have a differentiation, a split of responsibilities of more of the deep guy, more of the guy over the top of the box. So that I think that's still important when I'm looking at these guys in those situations.
I'll just be curious to see what that means for Keaton Ellis, because he specifically talked about run fits and how that was a learning curve for him coming from cornerback, right?
Yeah.
So, but when you look at Penn State safeties and who played this season, again, it's Brisker, Jair Brown, John Sutherland, Jalen Reed, and guess what? After that little hiatus at the beginning of the season for unknown or unreported reasons, I should say, it's Keaton Ellis.
Yep.
He's kind of the fifth guy back there.
He needs to find a home. I think that's what we're talking about here too. Is he that field safety? Because I don't know that I've seen him. He's got. So the idea is,
I think so. Honestly, right? I mean, I think that's what the plan is anyway. Is that they would like him to be able to fit into that role. So whether or not he can do it.
Here's my concern. And this is. You're a safety for a reason. You've been moved from corner for a reason, and it wasn't because you're an extremely good man coverage player. So whether it's Lamont Wade or it's Keaton Ellis, the reason you've moved there is because there are certain parts about your game that we don't want on the perimeter if you're Penn State's defense. So then those guys get matched up in single coverage anyway, because that's part of the field responsibility. So that's where I struggle with that conversation is, so we'll maybe have different matchups, but I don't think that the slot is easier in any way. So then becomes, do you take that guy and you put him on the boundary over top of the box? Because Keaton Ellis, his best skill is his run defense for a corner. Does that change when now he's in the box all the time? Does he bulk up and become that guy, and you leave Tig Brown at that field safety position where I thought he played well this year? The way those pieces fit to me, that's going to be curious, because I don't know how you're going to I don't know for sure how you're going to manage those factors.
We have 9 months to talk about it, buddy.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. We will solve all of these problems by September of next year. I promise.
Well, let's get a head start on that. We'll be done today, and we'll get to that this afternoon and evening. We'll be working all through Christmas. Don't worry. I'll be hard at the grindstone.
Yeah, I don't sleep. I don't celebrate holidays. My kids don't know who I am. It's fine.
All right, Nate. Once again, thanks for coming on the BWI Daily Edition. Appreciate it.
Hey, you got it anytime. Thanks, bud.
Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube to the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We'll talk to you tomorrow.